Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm Kyler Cheatham, your host of the Confluential Live today. We've got a cool topic, mostly about timelines, right? Like how do you legit know if your timeline is achievable when it comes to your technology implementation or your overall technology strategy when it comes to SaaS in general? So, as always, I'm joined by Adam. Well, most of the time, you've kind of been busy lately. I'm excited to be able to have that conversation with you. We're on LinkedIn and YouTube over here. I'm going to jump on TikTok live here in just a second. So we'll see how it works. Kind of like last week, we do have Adam here as well, which they can't see him on TikTok. So we'll have to kind of see how that goes. But the reason that I wanted to have this conversation today is we had a pretty viral video, right? That about the NetSuite class action lawsuit around their 90-day implementation timeline, and just understanding what that might look like from a timeline that vendors are going to be giving you, right? So I can tell you a little bit about the suite after you introduce yourself, and then we can kind of go from there and use it as a launch point if that works for you.
That sounds fantastic. So, everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and for those of you who are maybe listening to me on TikTok but not seeing me, my name's Adam Cheatham. I'm the CEO of The Confidential, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because timelines are one of those things that they're difficult to nail down. They're difficult to stay accountable to, and at the end of the day, they're what executives take as, well, you told me this was the timeline, but you had to be realistic about it, and where it is your time, what your timeline ought to look like, as well as what it is you're being told that it could look like. So I look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of dissect this NetSuite class action lawsuit that I'll kind of take you through. And again, this is not about NetSuite for sure. Listen, the live is not like dumping or dogging on them, right? This happens a lot of times in this conversation about off-the-shelf solution. A lot of you guys have seen me cover a variety of new SAP lawsuits or Oracle lawsuits where they're being sold an off-the-shelf solution and they don't understand the customization that's needed for the modern business in 2026. So just a quick overview, right? So the plaintiff in a class action lawsuit can be many different people, but the one that really started this was called Real Logic Solutions, and it's out of Ohio here in the States. It was filed in March of 2024. And again, it's important to include that this is a proposed class action lawsuit, right? It's not certified class. So the allegations have not been proven in court, and Oracle, of course, disputes all the claims. So just covering our bases there, right? So what happened in this lawsuit is that they're saying that NetSuite sold this off the shelf solution that's supposed to be able to be implemented in 90 days, right? And so this is for businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees that have purchased NetSuite license or paid these implementation fees in the last 5 years and didn't receive a full functioning product. And so what it is alleging is that they are saying that you could easily implement this in a business within 90 days. And they left out the significant customization that was required before the software could function. And then they alleged that Oracle knew that the proposed timeline was impossible and unrealistic. And then customers had to pay a significant amount of substantial implementation fees and didn't receive a working system within the promised time frame. But story as old as time, right? Contracts were signed, implementation work was allegedly handed out and farmed out to subcontractors rather than Oracle and the customer success team that they expected it to be. And so that's really what they're saying is like, you can't just say an off-the-shelf software works that way. So I'll get your kind of reaction to it while I turn on our TikTok live here. And then we can kind of dive into it from there.
Well, and so I think that at the end of the day, I've seen Oracle and Oracle system integrators implement NetSuite in 90 days, right? The challenge here um, is a 90-day timeline for something achievable. It's a 90-day timeline for what it is they said that they were going to provide achievable,
Mm-hmm.
and how did they know whether or not that was? That's what stands out to me, because at the end of the day, if it's Oracle knew it could never be done ever, and then they just that there are instances where that's been
Mm-hmm.
accomplished, right? So it's not that 90 days is impossible, um, but that's like saying I could go for a run in 15 minutes. It's okay, yeah, that's possible. It sure is.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about like a quarter mile, or are we talking like a full marathon, right? Because those are different things, different scopes. So I would suspect that that's a thread that Oracle would pull on pretty liberally and
Uh-huh.
say, I was like, well, yeah, you guys changed all of these things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then as things go, there's always enough blame to go around on both sides, where you're thinking it's not just Oracle or the system integrator that
Mm-hmm.
makes this hard. Clients make this hard too,
Yeah.
and that's there's a fallacy in this, that the client is never to blame for anything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a story on both sides, and it always is more appropriate to say neither side got it perfect, but that's not a realism in system implementations or project management in general. So there are a couple of bits and pieces in that I think are important. And by way of just kind of thinking about this as an example of the topic at hand, is your timeline real? I think that
Mm-hmm.
we've got consider that every single timeline that you are provided before you sign a contract is what's possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the framing you should think of. It's possible to achieve this timeline if the stars align.
Mm-hmm.
After that, you're going to talk to a real professional services team that provides a little bit of realism on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's. I'll give you an example. We're working with a client right now that said, "Well, we could do this migration in anywhere between 2 and 6 months." Well, that's what 2 and 6 months. That's and then the question really becomes, how fast can the client team
Yeah.
move to accommodate that, right? Because they're going to assume if we got a team of 15 people dedicated full time, yeah, we could do it in 2 months. If we get a team
Yeah.
of 15 dedicated half time, we could do it in 2 months. In reality, you're going to get a team of two full time, and then a whole smattering of people in bits and pieces over what's probably more like 9 months, right?
Yeah.
So there's that's you just had to play with the realism in it, and understand that at the end of the day, there's until you are through with testing, you have
Mm-hmm.
no idea when you're going live. You're
Mm-hmm.
guessing, and that's not any different than before you sign a contract in particular, because it's if everything works the way that it could, in the way that it does every now and again, this is what we look like.
Mm-hmm.
That's the system integrators and the vendor side of the story, which is, yeah, you can go live in 12 months, you can go live in 90 days, whatever it is. And then you start looking at yourself as a client and saying, yeah, but we're really complex. We're going to have we've got some other things that are normal business
Mm-hmm.
that are going to interfere with that timeline that they're not accommodating. So it's probably their 12-month timeline, probably more like 18. Whatever it is the
Yeah.
vendor says your timeline is, you wouldn't be out of hand if you added 50% to it,
Yeah.
just for measurement stick, right? So there's a lot of talking about what's an unknown in this conversation that we've got to nail down, and that's going to have an impact on your timeline.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that timeline has to do so much, as you mentioned, with like, are you with it as a business? Like, are you healthy and understanding all of those different things? Or are you trying to just outsource this implementation to that? So hopefully you guys can hear Adam on TikTok. You've never met him before. He's actually the CEO of The Confluential, which is a company I'm a partner at when it comes to these, kind of looking at these timelines. on TikTok since we just started. We've got questions coming in, which I promise I will get to those in just a second. But if you can hear him, definitely put a thumbs up. Since this is our first time trying it, we'll see if you guys like it. If you hate it, we won't do it again. So that's the goal, is just to kind of get all of these different conversations going, because as I just looked at in the NetSuite lawsuit, or the proposed lawsuit, right? Timelines are something that are so incredibly important to not only set expectations, but to budget around, right? How do you know if this is actually going to produce the value while utilizing the appropriate time and resources in here? So let's get to some of these questions alive with SaaS experts that SaaS providers fear. Absolutely. I love to be feared. It's my goal in life. So what's the difference between a necessary change and a business that might be kind of just chaotic? Right. So as you mentioned, we can't put all of our eggs into the vendor's basket, right? Or we have to be responsible for what we're responsible as the business. They can't lie to us, which they're alleging happened in the NetSuite situation, but we have to have some responsibility. So how do you look at a business, and definitely answer in the comments too, that just can't quite get it together? They're not really ready for this. Or how do you know, I guess, as a litmus test that they are ready?
Yeah, so that's a variety of different questions, right? So what's the difference between a necessary change and someone simply changing their mind? Executive approval, when it comes down at the end of the day, right? It might be the executive that simply changes their mind, and that's a net that, by sheer weight of the conversation, that becomes a necessary change, right? So if you strip out those types of things, and you get down to it, knowing the difference between a necessary change and an unnecessary change, we'll think of it that way. It comes down to our understanding of scope and how good of a job we're doing in the actual execution of things, right? So let's say we have these haphazard workshops, we kind of crash through them, and then we go through and we say, yeah, here's our requirements. I got a page, about a page of bullet points. You're good to go. Here they are. What that does is it leads to a lot of necessary changes that are based on an incompetence issue, right? We didn't do a good job of documenting our requirements. And so now all of these things that are quote unquote changes that are impacting our timeline because we're identifying them late are necessary, because we did a bad job up front of documenting what we need. That's one scenario of what's a necessary change. Another scenario of what's a necessary change are things that are identified along the way that are, actually, I didn't realize that that's the way the system went. That means that we have these other requirements, and now we have conversations on how do we change and configure the software. That's also a necessary change. If everything is done really well and properly, those necessary changes have a minimal impact on right? Because we see them coming from a mile away, right? We get all of our things documented properly. We assume that the somewhere around 80% plus is known requirements, and there's some type of a less than 20% new ones. There will always be new ones, and that's okay. Those changes should be considered as assumed things we're going to have to do. That's why you have conversations on, we're going to test. And because we're going to assume that not everything's going to work the first time. We're going to fix our defects, and then we're going to retest so that we can make sure that everything we fixed is actually fixed, right? Those are all changes. They're all necessary, right? But we've done a good job of planning, so they're incorporated into our timeline. There are other necessary changes that you can't see coming, that are just business fact. Our organization decided to acquire another business. Okay? That's a change that can impact your timeline, which is fine, just part of the deal. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just read some of the comments here. No matter the business or the ERP, it's always crazy in accounting. Adam, I'm pretty sure this is a bot on LinkedIn or on TikTok, but their username is Adam, and I've always thought it was you because they ask like unhinged questions, and they say like, "Can't you just forge the SLA and threaten litigation?" Ideally, no. So I used to think that was you, like just playing with me on TikTok, but it's not. So we've got another question here, kind of off topic, but again, these lives are what you guys want to talk about, not so much what we want to talk about. We just provide our time to be able to provide value in conversation, because as Adam mentioned in that, like not any timeline is going to be the same, right? And a lot of times if we're saying that it is, that's not the case. So what do you think about the BP SaaS model? So BPAAS model, not just SaaS, but the full process outsourcing model.
Business process as a service.
Yeah.
I don't know that I know a ton about it. I would say that your business processes should be unique to your organization, and they are for your people to facilitate. So I don't know that there's room for a service in there that isn't an employee.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to how that would be facilitated.
Yeah. Do you think it's higher risk, a bit more skin in the game from the providers? They want to know.
I think your processes should be your skin in the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
And you should be responsible for them, right? Technology should enable you and your employees to facilitate your processes. Now, there's best practice, right? Where there are certain ways that people tend to do things. Like a great best practice is a three-way match, right? Does what the thing that I get the items that I ordered, and does the invoice match the price that I was given, right? This
Yeah.
three-way match. That's a best practice. You can certainly pay whatever invoices you get that you want. You can certainly order whatever it is you think you need, but making sure those three things all sync up is a best practice. It's pretty easy to say. I got what I ordered, and I was charged what they said it would cost. Right now,
Yeah.
a little bit of irony in this from a software timeline perspective, but those best practices are things that you can learn from, but you and your business should still be facilitating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's outdated.
And I see you guys asking to add him into the duet. The real Adam, as we say in here, has never used TikTok in his entire life, as far as I'm aware. So next week we will add him in as a duet. Just give us a second. So I'm sorry it's not perfect.
I wasn't supposed to be here today, so I'm kind of crashing the party.
Right, he crashed my life. Rude. The bot Adam, who might not actually be a bot, I really don't know. I say all the things the real Adam wishes he could say / ask and do.
There's a laundry list involved with that, so congratulations.
Yeah. I just seeing a lot more fear from providers in business process as a service, and a lot more contractual focus. So I'm not really sure what that would look like. And you can give us more detail of call. And you can always message us like the specific contractual things to do, or the things you're asking. But I think the core function there is when we outsource our processes, right? Then that becomes something that can, again, create risk by giving the keys away to the additional vendor. And that's what we're always trying to get you guys not to do, right? So you can utilize these different pieces. Just make sure that you understand what that looks like. And I do think there should be accountability. Like, I think you have a good point, right? There should be some accountability in the contracting phase for the vendor, so that they really understand that. Now that depends on the vendor, right? If they really are going to be able to commit to that. But it's never a bad thing to be able to put that in and ask. And so let's see. You guys are cracking me up. As always, the TikTok audience is a little bit more rowdy. I wonder if organizations truly understand which processes actually differentiate their business and which ones they're just emotionally attached to. That's poetry right there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's I don't wonder.
I don't wonder.
There are 99% of business processes are things that everybody does one way or another. Right? There's nothing unique about most things. Now, there are sometimes things that are unique about how you do something that is a sustainable competitive advantage. But for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
um, what you're emotionally attached to, we call that change management or change
Mm-hmm.
intelligence at the Confluential, where it's
Yeah.
like, look, it's your process. You're getting new technology with the intent of changing your processes and changing the way that you do things. If you wanted to keep things the same as always, then why buy new technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it's kind of antithetical to the point. So it's an interesting pontification there, Avery.
And I think like in those process workshops, right, are a big kind of eye opener for these types of conversations because a lot of times our counterparts just simply don't know, right? I think you've said a lot, and we've seen a lot that you might have a workshop where it's like, hey, we spend 8 hours configuring this report for finance from IT, and then finance like, wait, we spend 8 hours deconstructing that report because that's not at all how we needed it. And that's just what they did, right? So I think there's something about just human nature when we look at the status quo and we just keep doing that because it's something that we're comfortable with, and changing process, no matter if it's an easy change or not an easy change, it's uncomfortable for a minute, right? Even if you have a big change in your life, like buying a new beautiful home, your drive is going to be a little different at home, and you're going to have to adjust to that. So I think that's a lot of understanding, which is why your processes need to be something that you as an organization investigate and really kind of harvest to be more optimized.
I think that's a fantastic point at the end of the day. And I think that there's a lot to being able to say, I have some responsibility for this as well. This is my process, and I need to make sure that I run it in a way that I'm open mindedly
Mhm.
thinking about what's better as opposed to how do I redo what it is I have today.
Mhm. Yeah. So let's go into understanding like what would be some almost like red flags, right? In these conversations that the vendor is selling you a timeline that does not exist. And really the first is going to be like, do you actually understand what you're asking for, and is your side of the street cleaned up, right? Are your
Yeah.
processes re-engineered? Some of that you're not going to be able to do perfectly, but being able to have like that documentation is a great first understanding, right? Do you have legit requirements, right? A lot of times businesses think that they do, but they have these huge gaping holes. And like, what kind of system do you want to buy? Walking into the grocery store, there's a lot of food there, but what kind of food do you want to buy, right? You don't have someone that comes to the door and being like, hey, I'm going to sell you this $1 million chicken, right? Because I want you to buy this chicken. You're like, oh, well, I'm kind
It's
of hungry,
rare.
I guess
It's
I
rare
will do that.
chicken.
Yeah, rare chicken, rare, right? So I think that's a lot of a lot of misunderstanding in that. So I think that's a big one. And then if it sounds too good to be true, it is, right? Right. So, and I think that goes for the vendor and the system integrator and big consulting, right? Those are kind
Yeah.
of the three layers. If you didn't see my video on like my hype cake layer, definitely go watch that because it goes into more detail about each layer of that. But that's a big understanding. Um, Are you in a women's prison? No, I'm not. I mean, it depends on what you define as prison, but thank you for asking. So let's do this one on LinkedIn here. From how do vendors determine estimated timeline? Everyone involved knows they're unrealistic. So why contract 4 to 6 weeks when it will be 12 to 18 off the bat, starting off on a bad note? Great question.
Yeah. So I would say that vendors estimate timelines based on what they think they know about the effort it's going to take, right? And I think that there's a little bit of truth in that to say that they're just throwing things out based on what it is they think will be accepted. I think is unfair to most. Now, are there some sales guys out there that's like, this guy told me it's got to be 4 to 6 weeks? I know that that's not going to happen, but we'll worry about that later. Yeah, one of my very first consulting jobs, the whole organization worked like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually left because I had a problem with the first job I had as the PM being to say, You could have your scope, or you could have your timeline. Which would you prefer?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just a miserable way to start that conversation off. There are some organizations that work that way. However, what most do, and that kind of meat of the bell curve, is they say we have a standard. Our standard project looks like this, and you fit this standard project the closest. So I'm going to plug you in and say, here's your timeline. This is what our quote unquote standard is for that. And then I don't see what's going on there.
You're not supposed to. They want to see you. So I'm just giving the
Oh,
people what they want. Yeah.
so it's a standard process and saying everybody fits into this bucket. NetSuite's 90-day suite success methodology. Everybody fits into you fit into the suite success 90 days. And then they throw in some caveats saying, well, it might be 100, it might be 120, but if you fit into the box, you fit into the box. So that's usually the meat of folks think of it that way. Now, there is a smaller segment of folks who sit down with their pencil and paper or spreadsheet or whatever, and they say, I know this company's complexities now. I understand them. I know what they're asking for, what the scope is. And now I'm going to build this project plan to be able to estimate a realistic timeline. And then they'll run into the sales guy who says that's too long. And they'll have a standoff. And the best of the best will say, I don't know, it doesn't, there's no sense in selling something that we can't fulfill. Here is the timeline. That's what you want to work with. But most, I would say 80% of organizations work from a perspective of saying, our standard timeline is this. Our ERP implementation timeline for a company like yours is 12 to 14 months. And so we're going to say that. Knowing that it's probably 18 to 24, but we'll worry about that later. Is generally the way they think about it. So it's imperfect, that's for sure.
And I mean, to your point, if they're going to start off on a bad note, right? They're showing you who they are, right? And that's actually a great gift in the beginning of the project, because you're able to make the decision, hey, these guys are acting shady, like it doesn't make sense. And then they too, like, I think a lot of people don't understand that we have a lot of vendors pull out of demos, right? We have a lot of them say like, hey, this isn't a good fit for us, or we can't meet these expectations. A lot of times, especially in private equity, when clients come to us and they're like, hey, we need to implement this in 6 months, we have to kind of set those expectations of like, they might not be available to implement that in 6 months. So it's not always them trying to do it off the bat. But if they are, I think that's honestly a really good thing, because you already know at the beginning, before you sign anything, that this is ridiculous, right? Yeah. And that's a lot of times what we come in and do is review those types of contracts and sit alongside that system integrator vendor selection to be like, yeah, that's not going to happen in any way, shape, or form. So I absolutely agree. Let them. So let's see, who has been the best company you've dealt with in the ERP space?
The Confluential.
Duh, our company, right? What about from the vendors? They always want to know, like, vendor SI side.
There's from a software vendor perspective, I gotta say IFS is top tier.
That's what I always say. That's what I said on our last slide.
I would say Epicor. And the reason for the two of those in particular is that they end up in fewer messes of misinterpretations. If you're able to talk realistically to them, I would say that you're doing a pretty darn good job. And I have seen both of those simply say, you know what, this is not for me. And that mile marker right there is what I think differentiates the two of them, in being able to say there is a fit here or there is not, and I think that that's important. I will also throw, and this might be a little controversial, but I will also throw a shout out to Infor, in that they do really, really try hard to find a fit, right? Yeah. They work really hard to make sure that expectations are met, and that they're doing a good job of fulfilling what it is they can. Their challenge is less of the can we find a way, is that they have so many packages.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
always an answer, and they'll find a way to make it work. And I do think that there is a team there that genuinely wants to do a good job.
Yeah.
So I would give them an I would throw their name into the mix as well as folks that when I'm looking for a vendor, a software vendor product, and I'm looking for folks who really want to do a good job and really want to do the right thing at the organizational level. I'd say those three are the ones that come to mind the fastest. We'll say.
Absolutely. Well, so a lot of times, I don't even know if you know this, but in our TikTok channel, we've got some professional hackers that are actually paid to get into, like they're cybersecurity experts that are paid to get into that. And they said they'll give a try for IFS and let you know how it goes, to see if you can get in there from a security standpoint. They want to know the worst too. And I would say the worst is really hard because it completely depends on where you're at, right? And who you hired, right? So you might have like the perfect software. Adam's not allowed to say a lot on that because he's an expert witness, and people still have to hire him to be on the stand and not prove bias, but I don't, right? So I think the worst are going to be when you get in a tier 1 contract that you can't get out of, right? Or you were sold a low ball offer for a phase 1, right, from a big system integrator, especially like offshore system integrators. They really like to do that too. And I would say, and Adam, you correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the remediation restoration projects that come across our desks, the number one thing I see is they don't understand or they hired the wrong system integrator. It's rarely the wrong software, and it's going to be the system integrator on that.
Yeah, and I would say that in that same capacity, the ones that are the worst at the end of the day are always more akin to an individual sales guy who promised things that were unrealistic and either did it on purpose or did it because they didn't know, right?
Yeah.
That can happen to any of these organizations. And it can create lots of problems because if you're selling something that you don't understand, then it becomes problematic no matter what you do. So I don't know that any particular organization is worse at it than any other, but I would put it at the individual level.
Yeah, so they say I'm in IT procurement. I have my list, but I agree integrators are the major cause of issues. And feel free to share your list. Like we're all, this is a safe space. We're all anonymous here, except for obviously us. So let's talk a little bit about in timelines, this like constant state of discovery. I know that's something that drives you absolutely nuts, like on these types of projects, is like when we're still in discovery after we've executed these timelines, and there needs to be a little bit of that, right? But we don't need to be in discovery for the rest of our lives. And I think it's good. It's a good question here we have on LinkedIn. Do implementations plans contain enough explicit assumptions, or are those left until discovery? I would say I would rework that question of like, how long is discovery, or how do you know if you've gone into like this constant state of discovery?
I would say the discovery from a perspective of it, first, what is the actual stage, right? What's the end point? When are you done with discovery, right? Is this we have some ideas about what you look like, and now we can move on to actual process workshops, or does it include the process workshops? So I would say discovery is fact finding that gives a little bit of information. So if discovery itself is more than 10% of your timeline, you're spending too long on it. Okay. However, discovery should lead to real design types of workshops, right? Discovery is more like project planning, and you have an actual design and build space, blueprinting, whatever it is you want to call it, where you're documenting requirements. And I don't think that you never spend too much time documenting requirements. I say never, quote unquote, with a huge caveat. You can certainly get analysis paralysis if we start getting stuck, but documenting your requirements is important. Call them user stories and acceptance criteria, call them requirements, whatever. But knowing what's going to get built is absolutely the most important part of the puzzle. And if you spend 25% of your whole project in that space, that's fine, because everything else is built off that. And if you don't spend enough time in it, you will spend more time in it later, whether it's because you found out in testing, or even worse, you found out after you went live how much you missed, and now you're stuck. You got a system that doesn't work, and that's not anybody's fault but who did the requirements, and that might be you.
Yeah. As I always say, like, you're responsible for the software that you buy at the end of the day, right? The system integrator is technically there to configure it, right? To plug it in and make sure that it works, but it does not so much that you actually use it and prevent, like, you actually get value from it. So you guys are cracking me up over here. You can never discover enough in discovery. The more you learn, the less you know. And the less you know, the more you learn. Never say never. And so I know, always a fun group on TikTok. Let's see, clients don't know what they have or where it's at, have to pay a premium. And I think there's a level at which, when you come to the table and you have no idea what your overall business is, then you're going to be in this longer state of discovery because you don't actually know what you're buying. And that's where we get to the point, especially in our current landscape, where we're buying a system that we don't know what it is and we don't really understand how to utilize it. And then we go to our system integrator, and then all of a sudden they're plugging stuff in, and we don't know how to, actually garner real value out of those conversations. So I think, that's a big piece of these conversations. So let's get another one over here. In that, sorry, there's so many great questions. I just want to get to one that I think I skipped. How do you optimize your processes when everyone does something different?
One step at a time, I guess. Everybody does something different, but at the same time, there should be a standard, right? So your organization will have a happy path, if you will. This is how it should be done from end to end if everything goes the way that it's supposed to. And then you have your exceptions. Everybody does everything separately. You optimize by getting everybody to do things the same, right? If you've got 9 different people who do the same thing 9 different ways, I promise you, one of them is the worst and one of them is the best, just by definition of the terms, right? So figure out which is which, and start leaning more towards what's better than what's worse.
Thunderdome. We use the Thunderdome. 2 process enter, 1 process leaves.
I like it. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from that understanding, that being part of your timeline, like, that's not essentially part of the project always. And I think that's where some of these can get really held up, and then we don't know, we got the finger pointing, like, this is the vendor's fault. Well, they can't read your mind, right? Nor can anyone as a business. And being able to have those, some people call it phase 0. I really hate that term because I think it's not a phase 0. It's very much of a phase in your organization that you need to go through to make sure that you're a healthy business, right? What's the best way to validate requirements before the deployment starts?
Depends on what the word deployment means, I guess. But the best way to validate requirements is to sit down and walk through them and read them out loud as a group. Say, this is what I heard you say, so that's how I wrote it down. Is this capture what it is you say? And then you have the people who actually own those requirements from a process perspective say yes or no. And if they say no, then you make adjustments, right? There's a process in understanding that. And I think that one of the things that I think is challenging from a perspective of the whole conversation, you bring it back to timelines because there's always an impact to it, is people want to avoid conflict, right?
That's a good point.
I would say don't avoid conflict, lean into it and seek a resolution to the conflict after you've gone through it, right? If you're avoiding the conflict, you're avoiding the problem. If you avoid the problem, it doesn't go away. requirements, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How do we validate them? If I think this is a process optimization, whatever it is you want to call, the Thunderdome is healthy, yeah.
The
Um,
Thunderdome. We're
in there,
stealing that,
and
just so you know. We're
it doesn't
taking.
have to be the Hunger Games, right? So
It doesn't have to be, but it could be.
it depends on your organization. Sport is fun. At the end of the day, you should have conflicts when you're talking about an ERP implementation or some type of large scale project. That's the idea. The point is to find them and resolve them. That way, you know what they are and you know how to tackle them. And then you have fewer issues with your timeline. If one of the things that I look for, this kind of a what things are missing, is you send over requirements documents, right? I talked to 15 people to document this whole company's requirements, and I send over this massive document, and the next day I get a series of folks like, "Yep, looks good, approved."
Mm-hmm.
Really? For real? That's like, you have no changes. You have 1,500 requirements. You have no changes. Okay, that's like we missed an opportunity on that. The fact that
Yeah.
feedback is missing means that I'm tuned out. Somebody's tuned out
Yeah.
and they're not paying attention. Um, and then that leads to conflicts later that are harder to solve because now I built that. And
Yeah.
I got you said right here, you had no feedback. Well, I didn't know, or I didn't have time, or I don't give a shit how much time you don't have. This is important. And if your organization isn't dedicating the time and focus to it, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to get effectiveness out of it. And that's where your timeline is going to slip. This is where you start thinking, is it the vendor or is it the client that's causing these timeline problems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's such a huge consideration, like in the entire process, right? And you can't understand how important requirements are until you do them wrong. I feel like, right? Like, and that's a big piece. If we're getting those emails back being like, oh, this looks great, it's like, okay, then you're at risk of, again, giving away the power to your business to someone else, because these are key requirements and it should be seen as, discipline that you have in all of these different business processes. So I love that. They said, well, can you just test them in prod? They're just joking, obviously. But
That's not a joke. That's a real problem. People
he's
do
like,
that.
that's not a joke. No, that's people actually like to do that. Right. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. How often are the people who actually execute the process every day missing from these workshops?
Too often. And here's why that's important. Now you have your business process owners in your implementation, and these are the folks who are going to sign off on what this process should actually look like in the implementation of the new software itself. However, the people who do the job every day are the ones that know how it's actually done,
Mm-hmm.
right? There have been many workshops that I have facilitated where somebody's walking me through the process, like, this is how I do it. And then their manager goes, no, it's not. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is how I do it every day. And then you have to stand up with, that's not the process. And then, well, your process doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how I had to get my job done. You asked me to get my job done, and this is how I do it. That person I need. The manager who has no idea what's going on, I don't, because they're
Yeah.
not paying attention and they're more focused on what should be as opposed to what is. And what is useful. What should be is less.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's a lot of people hide behind that, right? Because 9 times out of 10, when you bring in the actual frontlines person in that conversation, they're like, we don't actually do it that way. We haven't done it that way for like 5 years, because our job is to get product out the door. And we
Yep.
can't like dance around your fancy system that slows us down. So we do it this way, and then we input it after at the end of the day. And you're absolutely right, Richard. You got to know what the hell is happening. I'm going to do the M&Ms one, and then I'll do this one. That's why you put the brown M&M caveat somewhere in the recommendations. A bowl of brown M&Ms must be provided to accounting by 3 p.m. on Thursdays. Absolutely.
It would be appropriate that accounting wants colorless.
Yeah, M&Ms, right? For feedback, you have to understand what the hell is happening. Absolutely. You most definitely do in order to do that. When I was at IBM, we were pretty good at getting BPMs and getting process executors in workshops. Never perfect, but we got the front lines in most sessions, but it takes a lot of wrangling. It definitely does,
Yeah.
for sure. This is a longer one on LinkedIn. Love the long question, so I'm going to read it and then we'll get into it. I've seen a continued trend of IT when, sorry, it jumps around on me, when procurement and planning are happening. IT is first considered inconvenient and then it is expected to be magic. Sail this potentially wrong ship while building it with a team that will now be seen in a bad light from the jump. These are reputation and career years passing down in the weeds with the cross functional resources I would like to advocate for. Tale as old as time, right here.
So I think that in that same conversation, there's a lot wrapped up in that too, right? So um, IT, when procurement is talking about purchasing new software, IT should be involved in that, right? The easiest example is you bought a software that's on an Oracle database, and you think it's going to talk to the software that's on the Microsoft database, and you're going to just cram them together. And nobody thinks of that, right? Nobody thinks that, well, it's not a Microsoft or an Oracle software, so why does it matter? It's like, because the database is different, right? We have a data warehouse that operates this way, and a BI tool that pulls information from it based on how that communicates. And you just bought something that is going to require an integration layer that skyrockets our complexity. IT should be involved in that conversation, at least from a perspective of being able to say, in order to do this, we need to actually stand up a new virtual server. We need to have another person who does the opposite of what we do today. We're currently a Microsoft shop. We need an Oracle DBA. We're currently an Oracle shop. We need a Microsoft DBA. So I need those types of things that we don't have today to be able to maintain this new system that you just bought. And then somebody says, well, that's inconvenient. Why can't I have what I want? That because what you have, what you want, you're not including the full cost of it, which is where procurement should be helping, right? It
Yeah.
takes money to do all of these things correctly. That's like buying a car and forgetting that you're gonna have to pay for either the plug-in charger because it's electrical or the gasoline, right?
Yeah.
You can't buy it and assume that neither of those costs exist. And
Yeah.
maybe you don't have the electrical charging infrastructure in your home for this new electric car.
Yeah. Right.
Now we had to buy that, or we can't drive our car, right? That's what we have. That's IT should be involved in that because they're going to think of things that need to be important. Now, there are other pieces of this that's important to remember from an interpretation perspective. There are pieces of that puzzle which are, what does it take to implement what the business is requesting, that are simply, this is an implementation level task that's going to need to get done. IT folks tend to like to ask all of those questions so they
Yeah.
get the full picture. And then all of a sudden it looks like they're saying, no, we can't do this. When a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, they're simply trying to figure out how they're going to plan this and
Exactly.
execute on what you're asking for. So you got to know that you got to include them so that you know what the full cost is. Otherwise, it's unfair for you to say, "Well, I bought this software and IT can't figure it out."
Yeah.
Well, you said you dealt them a bad hand, right?
Yeah.
But he's got to do their part on saying, on at least being able to understand these are things that we can solve when we get started. I'm just asking the question now so that I have a feel for it later.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of the timeline, right? Like, if you bought a technical piece of your organization and you didn't consult the technical team, then that is going to be a huge issue, right? Because they might not have the, ability to release it when you want to release it. And they certainly aren't going to be able to fix it when you break it, right? A lot of times we see those conversations of like, hey, our production agent is broken and can you fix it? And IT's like, what production agent?
Right.
Right.
Well, I think that just as important, the analogy that comes to mind to me is I have a heart problem, so I'm going to have open heart surgery. Here is the plan that I'm going to get to the surgeon, and they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
right? They're the ones that have to do this. And they're like, just pull my heart out, put a new one in. I'll get one's on the way. And like, that's from a different animal.
That's
And it
from a
doesn't,
different animal.
and so like, that's not how that works.
That's an elephant heart. Thank you. No, I don't need that. This is not compatible. Yeah. So I think it's ERP implementation, trauma bonding. Absolutely. I think those are a big understanding. I just want to say hi and great content. I work in Services Australia. But well, thanks so much for being here. I'm so glad I think it's pretty late there. If I've witnessed firsthand some of the content in your videos. I'm stealing that analogy. They like that one. The heart surgery. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the best part about these lives is we steal analogies. We got the Thunderdome and we've got the heart surgery. And it's interesting, like Adam's take on that, because we differ in like where we think technology strategy should live. He always says the business. I always say IT. Right. And don't assume, bold of you to assume that I don't want an elephant heart. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah.
It sounds like a business user at heart.
Yeah. It sounds like a business user. And so I think a big understanding of that, like, when we bring it all back in though, is you cannot absolutely have a timeline that makes any sense without, IT being in that. And so like, I hear you. And I think it's super validating to understand that other people go through that same thing of like, I want you to steer the ship into the rocks and then pull it back when it hits the rocks. And it's like, okay, well, we could just not aim for the rocks in the first place, but here we are. Right. And so a lot of people really understand, that piece. I just want to acknowledge this one. The child support system replacement project was a disaster on a much larger scale than you covered. The staff implication alone was horrendous. And I'll do a follow-up on that one. I think you're talking about the Queensland, Australia one, where, people weren't getting paid. And unfortunately, we see that all the time in restoration projects. The vendor says elephant hearts are better for dashboard KPIs.
They're bigger. So I think, well, I want to pick at something though. In a restoration, right? One of the things that I've seen too many things go live, bomb, and then you still let the system integrator drive. They made this mess and they know how to fix it. They don't. If they know how to fix the mess, they wouldn't have screwed it up in the first place. And one of my favorite examples, I was talking to somebody about their implementation that went live and went sideways. And they had a big four implementer, and this big four implementer had all kinds of stuff going on. This was over phase one. And the gal that I was talking to was walking me through one of their scenarios, and they couldn't pay their employees.
Yeah.
Right. This is about as bad as it gets, right?
Yeah.
I cannot issue paychecks to people. And it's been weeks since we've been able to do that. And so the finance gal, the VP of finance, was recounting that she was in this session and said, we are going to pay people from accounts payable. We are going to start writing checks to people to pay them. And for the accounting folks on the line that want the brown M&Ms, this is like an explosion in their worst nightmare.
This is a blue M&M in their brown M&M bowl.
Right, exactly.
This is absolute crisis.
This is about the stupidest thing that you can do. But she's having this conversation, and the system integrator consultant had the stones to say, I'll see if I can get that approved for you. And she's like, I'm the VP of finance, and I'm not asking you. Yeah. I am telling you what we are doing now, and it is your job to fix it later because you created this problem. And what ended up happening is some idiot ended up checking all of the, setting up all of the deposits for the checking accounts of their employees and flagging them as savings. And checking all of the ones that were savings accounts and checking them as checking. These are just simple flags. Somebody screwed that up. They flipped it, and nobody got paid, except the people who got checks into both accounts.
Yeah.
And they were trying. Why did some people get paid, but not all people? Because if nobody gets paid, then it's easier to tell. It's also easier to just start cutting checks. But this is like an accounting nightmare to just start issuing checks, right?
Yeah.
So. And her answer was, I don't care what it is you think you're going to approve. I
Yeah.
have already started doing this.
Yeah.
We are not going to take your recommendation on what's going to cost us our workforce. So,
Mhm. My flabbers are gasted. We are flabbergasted as well. Adam always has the best stories. So, in the last minute here, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, we're not professional live streamers or TikTokers. So, our goal is to bring the audience as much as possible to get your questions answered. So, next week, I'll plan to have Adam as a duet on TikTok. I promise we're technology executives. We can definitely figure that out. But other than that, if you have any additional questions, as always, just DM me. It can always remain anonymous. A lot of these conversations, it totally depends on what's going on for your timeline. So we'll be live on YouTube and LinkedIn next Friday, right? And then we'll also be live on TikTok on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday next week. So if you have questions or anything like that, just let us know. But I really want to thank you guys for being here today, and we'll see you next week. All right. Bye, everyone.
everybody.